And welcome back to the Soar Higher podcast, a show for leaders by leaders focused on providing business and career advice, tools, and resources to help people achieve higher levels of success in their life. Awesome to be back with you today. This is your host, Coach Jason Ballard. And first and foremost, I just want to wish everybody a happy Halloween. You know, this is one of my favorite times of year for me and my family, and have been gearing up, getting costumes and all those kind of things for some of the parties that we're having here in our neighborhood. So hope you have a fun-filled day. This is a great Halloween for you. And as with a normal Halloween tradition, Halloween's about, walking around the neighborhood with your kids all dressed up and enjoying all the different costumes and creative ideas that we all have and celebrating this particular holiday. But it's also about getting out and walking around the neighborhood, seeing your friends and neighbors and having some laughs and good times as well. Similarly, I want to talk to you today about walking around. In fact, is a leadership quality that I highly recommend to all of the people that I coach, and I recommend to all the folks listening to this show, is leadership by walking around, managing and leading by walking around. And so today, I want to talk to you about a particular book that is really an authority on this. This is a little known book. I find that not many people know about it, but it's a book called Lincoln on Leadership. This is about President Abraham Lincoln and his time while being president of the United States. Obviously, he took over during a very tough time, Civil War. The nation was ripped and torn apart. Not exactly like it is today in 2022, but there are some signs of polarization and just people that are angry, people that are protesting, people that are going through lots of different things in their lives, and just differences in our country, not on the same scale as when President Lincoln was the president of the United States and going through a complete civil war. Hopefully we never see those days again, but there's a lot of really good lessons from his time as president, really great examples of how to lead during very tough times. And so I want to walk through that book with you and kind of do a book review and pull out some really important things that I think are important even in today's time. It's interesting how this book was published and released in 1992 by Donald Phillips. He's the author of Lincoln on Leadership. And this is an easy read. It's an easy book to go through. It doesn't take very long. But out of all of the leadership studies, all the leadership courses, classes, things that I've been through to develop my own leadership and to serve well as a coach, this is one of my favorite books. And I hope that you will get some value out of this as much as I have. And so let's talk a little bit about the 4 simple strategies for which Lincoln led, for which he ran his presidency and made decisions. Managing by walking around, I think a lot of us may have heard of that term, but that is becoming less and less of a practice in today's world. I worked for a particular boss one time, General. He was a 4-star general when I was in the Air Force, General Hal Hornberg. And when he would mentor leaders, when I was with him and was working, in his area and worked for him as his aide, there was an interesting thing he would constantly talk about when he met with other leaders and other folks that he came across. He himself exemplified this trait of leading and managing by walking around, but he talked about it so passionately all the time. And he says, we've become a society of digital leaders. versus analog leaders. And you're thinking, well, normally in the modern day era, digital is always better than analog. However, let's understand General Hornberg's intent here. The intent was to not be a digital leader. How we have all these great advancements in technologies for which we can communicate, email, texting, messaging, social media. We have all these different ways for which we can, very fast and efficiently communicate with people. But just because you send messages and just because you send emails sitting behind your desk doesn't mean people are understanding those things with the right intent, and they're understanding it how you want to be understood. And so digital leadership is when people are focused on leading behind the desk, leading behind a screen. There's certainly times we need to get behind the screen and communicate effectively. But for the most part, as leaders in this fast-paced world that we live in, I encourage you to think about it in the way that General Hornberg thought about it, and that was analog leadership. Get out from behind the desk, walk around, talk to people, look at the environment for which they are working and operating, understand their perspective, help yourself as a leader become more informed as possible so you can make the best decisions possible for the people and the organizations. And so that's really the basis of Lincoln on Leadership. It's really based on 4 main strategies and components. 1, people. 2, character. 3, endeavor. And 4, communications. And so I want to kind of break those down for you here real quick on this podcast, because these are very powerful things. I think it's very wise for leaders to always stop and assess where they're at, where their organization's at, and what they may need to be doing to keep circling the wagons and make sure everybody on the team is in tow, is together, and you're not losing people along the way. So let's kind of break this down. President Lincoln, even today in 2022, is still revered as one of the most popular and revered presidents in American history. Why? Well, a few reasons. 1, he was very down to earth. He was very approachable. He was very easy to talk to. He was very common sense oriented. He didn't like a lot of frills and thrills, protocols, pomp and stance. He just liked to just get on a one-to-one personal level with people and get to know them personally, get to understand their perspective from the environment for which they live, breathe, and work. Very, very powerful to see things and understand things from other people's perspectives. He was not the kind of president that summons people to the White House on a regular basis, where he sat in the White House on a throne and people just came to him every day and catered to him and did whatever he wanted them to do, where everybody came to him. He much preferred to get out of the White House. He loved getting out in the White House. He was, again, President Lincoln, again, was a very much from the country. He was born in the state of Kentucky and kind of grew up in the country setting. And he liked to get out. He liked to enjoy nature. And so he liked traveling and going out and seeing different parts of the country. And of course, visiting with different types of people. So let's kind of peel back the onion. What is the people factor here? President Lincoln, as he went through his presidency, he learned to be a leader and make the best decisions possible. You have to understand the dynamics for which decisions are being made. being the President of the United States, decisions are being made on a national scale from all over the country. We have representatives that represent all of the people from all of the 50 states. And all of those things need to be taken into consideration, especially during the middle of a civil war where the country was torn and divided and fighting and killing each other, and horrific things were happening. And this fight for freedom, the fight to free slaves, the fight for the future of the country was at stake. I would argue in his presidency that he was probably one of the most influential presidents that really turned the tide of the country for which we have the luxury of enjoying the freedoms today, was really on the back of President Lincoln and a number of the leaders that served around him. They really did shape where we are today. But President Lincoln was a people person. One of the reasons he's so much admired even today, and why he's one of the most quoted presidents of our time, is because his ability to connect with people. You always felt like he cared about you genuinely. He took time, whatever time necessary, to just get to know you, understand, ask questions. And that's very, very powerful. There was a story out of the book where the country was going in the wrong direction. The president had put a number of people in power, generals that were leading the army in the military, and he went through 9 different generals before he met Ulysses S. Grant. And one that really got this vision and was able to execute the vision and move the country forward. 9 different leaders he went through to finally get to the right one. But he also had another obstacle. The person that was running the State Department, the Secretary of State at that time, was William Seward. And he was not a fan of President Lincoln. He was part of a previous administration. President Lincoln came in and decided to keep him on board. They were disconnected. William Seward was not in alignment with President Lincoln, but President Lincoln saw things in him, saw leadership, saw things that most other people wouldn't. Other presidents would have probably forced him to resign and move on and put somebody in place that they thought may have been different. But President Lincoln was insightful, and he used those real important people skills to connect with him. And so he would go visit William Seward in his office, and they would go out and they get in these carriages and they take rides through the countryside, through Virginia and in different areas. And they would ride and they would get to know each other, and they would just spend time together. And over time, William Seward actually became one of the biggest fans, the biggest supporters of President Lincoln, and during his time, one of his solid leaders. They got on the same page, and just spending time together and understanding each other. I don't think, from what I understand in the book, that they agreed eye to eye on every single little issue that was going on in the world, but they did get on the same page. President Lincoln was able to lead him and influence him in a way where he was a key leader in moving this country forward, and was certainly a part of the success of the country going forward. President Lincoln, under his principle of people, was also an alliance builder. He knew he couldn't be successful. He couldn't lead the country and accomplish the massive amount of things that need to be accomplished in the middle of a civil war to move the country together, to unite the country, to drive new purpose and meaning for the country going forward, where we all people could enjoy those freedoms without building alliances, building changing hearts and minds, not only of the people in his own staff, but the people in general, the citizens, the people that were facing the atrocities of war, people that were volunteering to fight in the war and support the war in all the ways possible. One of the things that I think is very, very powerful is he's known to be a persuader. His choice in influencing people was to persuade people, not coerce people, not to force people. It wasn't his way or the highway, or my way is the best. It wasn't putting fear into people, leading by fear. He led by persuading them, getting them to understand his perspective as the president of the United States. He's in charge of the whole country, and a lot of people don't understand the broader dynamics there. They only see things through the lens for which they can see things, and he was an expert. He was one of the best at persuading people and getting them to understand his perspective and getting them on board. He was also really great at understanding their perspective. And understanding that perspective meant it changed his views, for which there was alignment between people that may not have been in sync at the beginning of the conversation, where they leave the conversation, where they can find a place where they both can come to terms, and the president can make really good decisions, and people would be excited about supporting him. One really powerful lesson there is he is a person of the people. Leadership is about people. Managing is about equipment, resources, tools, and things like that. Leadership is about people. If you can't connect with people, if you can't get people on board and motivate them and excite them and get them to see something bigger than what they are able to see and understand things on a different level so they can contribute to things that are bigger than themselves, it's hard to lead because people aren't motivated to move. President Lincoln was great at that. Number two, President Lincoln's second strategy for in his book, based off of Lincoln on leadership, was character. Number two is character. A person has to have character to be a leader. You can't not have values and principles and be of good character and not lead. There's a quote of President Lincoln where he talks about, and I quote, "If you want to understand the character of a man, put him in a position of power." My goodness, man, if we look around in our politics today, we see many, many examples of where people are in a position of power, and sometimes they abuse that. They aren't looking out for the best interest of the people that support them. They're making bad decisions. They're making ill-informed decisions, doing things that are unethical, illegal. Unfortunately, there are people in our world that just aren't of good character. Therefore, they're unable and unqualified to lead. Even though they may be in a leadership position, it's temporarily. It's a matter of time before they fall out of that position of leadership. We see examples of this all the time in the news. So be a person of character. Honesty. Well, there's a reason Abraham Lincoln is one of the most liked and popular presidents of our time. One of the reasons is because of his nickname, Honest Abe. He was very honest, very down to earth, very genuine and sincere, and he led with the utmost integrity. That was critical, especially during a time of turmoil and war. Another principle that President Lincoln was focused on was never lead and act out of vengeance. Always give yourself time to process information, even if it's bad information, even if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're defiant, or things aren't going according to plan. Never, never lead and act and make decisions based on vengeance. Allow that to process. Allow yourself to get better information. Allow yourself to calm down, look at the facts, look at the data and what the data is telling you, and allow those things and the people around you that are experts to help guide those decisions, not with a bad attitude, not in anger, not with vengeance. The third component of character is to be courageous to take on criticism. Especially in this modern day world. President Lincoln certainly had a lot of critics and people judging you when you're the leader of the free world, when you're a leader, period. It doesn't matter if you're the president of the United States, if you are a leader of a small company, a big company, a nonprofit, or anything else out there. If you're in a position of leadership, you are going to be criticized often. Doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're doing the wrong things. Sometimes people just are in a place in life where that's just where they're at. They're critical, they're judgmental, and you can't change that. Sometimes people just don't understand what's going on. They don't understand enough, and they only have a certain amount of information. And so based off of the lens for which they're seeing things, they start criticizing because they don't understand the big picture. When that happens, that's when, as a leader, you need to have the courage to lean into the criticism. A lot of people are defensive about criticism, and they don't like criticism. They'll get in front of you and they'll say, okay, yeah, give me some feedback. How are things going? And that's great. But if you give them criticism, like, I don't think that was a good decision. This doesn't seem to be working. People aren't excited to follow you down this path. Something's not right here. And you start getting criticism. That's, as a leader, should be, tipping you off. Your red flag should be just beeping and alarming in your mind that something is not right. Something's disconnected. Doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that the people you're leading are not connected with you in the way you need them to be. That's where you need to pause, understand the criticism, embrace it, have courage to be in it. And sometimes, you just have to agree to disagree with certain people, but welcome the criticism, get in the mud and roll around, with people in the mud, soaking up the criticism, because the criticism can give you really important information. So be courageous with taking on the criticism. All right, so we've covered number 1, which is people, covered number 2, which is character. We're going to get into number 3, which is the endeavor part, acting, taking action, right? Being decisive. President Lincoln was very, very good in his decision making. He wasn't perfect, of course. He's a human. Nobody's perfect, but generally speaking, he made really good decisions because he did his absolute best to get the best information from the source, the source and the experts of the information from their perspective, from their office, from their battlefield headquarters, from whatever perspective they may be in at the time. He prided himself in going to the source and getting as best information as possible to make those decisions. And when he felt he had the right decision, he was decisive. He would execute. He would not hesitate. He would not overthink. He would not overanalyze. He would execute and move forward. Second part of endeavor, I think, is really, really cool, is leading by being led. Well, what does that mean? That means you let your subordinate leaders lead you, meaning they're the experts. They're, in this case, the generals that were leading the the military activities, in the Confederate War, they were on the ground. They were seeing things unfold as things were happening. They had the best information. And so when President Lincoln would engage them and ask them how it's going and what do you need? How can we support you? Have we made the advancements we need to make? Have we conquered the battles we need to conquer? And he got information from them. He would also say, well, what do we need to do next? What do you recommend we do? And he let the generals and his cabinet members that he put in leadership positions lead him. Most of the time, he would agree with them and move forward. There were occasions where he didn't think things were going right, or they were missing a component of whatever was going on that he needed to inject and make sure those things happened when they needed to happen, how they needed to happen. And he was very decisive in doing that at certain times with certain people. He would remove people from positions that weren't able to advance the cause, and he put more people in those positions that were able to overcome obstacles and do those things. The third thing is having goals. Be decisive. Let your subordinate leaders lead you, and then having goals. The most successful people in life have goals. If you don't have goals, then you can't get everybody on the same page because everybody's doing their own thing if there's no goals that align everybody together. You have to have goals. You have to talk about the goals, put the goals into place, be very clear about the goals, and follow up until the goals are completed. Number 4, be results oriented. Life rewards action and results, period. President Lincoln was excellent at ensuring you can get the results that need to happen. You have to win the battle here before you can win the war down the road. Little small battles and victories over a period of time from region to region allow you to win the war. That was why the Union was so successful ultimately, is they managed the battles and got the victories. They got the results, which led to ultimately winning the war. The war ended. Slavery was over. The country came together, and the rest is history. There's another interesting aspect called keep searching for the right grant. As I mentioned earlier, President Lincoln, when it came to generals leading the war effort, went through 9 different leaders before he met Ulysses S. Grant, who was able to actually do the things he needed to fully do throughout the course of this endeavor. Went through 9 different generals. So what's the lesson there for you leaders listening right now is always keep moving forward. Always keep challenging your people. And if you don't feel things are right, don't hesitate in finding the next leader. A lot of folks today, with the great resignation and post-pandemic stuff going on and the economy the way it is, people are scared to let go of people. They're scared to make moves because they don't know if they're going to find somebody or if it's going to cause a major disruption in the business. And I was talking to a leader in a company the other day that hired me to work in his company, and he's got no leadership in his company. He is the CEO. He is the only leader. Out of 100 employees, he is the only true leader. He's got some supervisors, got a couple of mid-level managers, but they're still junior and inexperienced himself, and he's working himself to death trying to lead and train and do all this stuff and run the company, and the company's struggling, is in really bad shape, unfortunately. Hopefully we can turn that around here real soon, but he needs to find the right grant, just like Lincoln did, to help him move, win the battles, and ultimately win the war. This particular gentleman that I talked to needs the right grant. He needs a few more leaders on the team that can move the ball and take all the pressure off himself, because he's certainly not able to do everything for everybody. Lastly, under the endeavor category is constant pursuit of innovation, problem solving, excellence, always chasing excellence, always improving, always challenging the status quo and raising the bar over and over and over. Those things there have allowed President Lincoln to be one of the most successful leaders, in addition to, keeping his character upstanding, and obviously his way of connecting with people. Those three things for sure have been enabled him to be successful and win and do the things he needed to do for the betterment of this country. And thank God he did. I'd hate to think where we'd be today if we didn't end the Civil War and if things were still like it was before the Civil War. Now that leads us to number 4. People number 1, character number 2, endeavor number 3, the last component of his strategy for leading Lincoln on leadership and leading and managing by walking around is communication. Oh my goodness. I have conversations about this every single day with everybody I talk to, it seems like. We're in the digital, it's kind of like my example of in the story of General Hornberg, digital leadership versus analog leadership. It's about communication. If you are a leader and you struggle to communicate, you struggle to get a message to people in the way that you need that understood so they can execute, you are not a leader. If you cannot communicate, you are not an effective leader. I want to repeat that again. If you are in a position of leadership and you are considered to be a quote unquote leader and you cannot communicate effectively, you are not a leader. Leaders have to communicate. They have to communicate to the masses, as in like public speaking. They have to be able to articulate themselves via the written form as well. Letters, messaging, emails, whatever that may be. You need to be able to master the art of communication in every single way possible. Well, when you think about communication, you think about things like the Gettysburg Address. President Lincoln was known to be quite the orator. He was known to be quite a person that can deliver a wonderful message, just smoothly put. If you go back and you listen to or read the Gettysburg Address, it's masterful. We just simply do not communicate in that way anymore. And it was just master. It was motivating. It was encouraging, but it was just the flow of it and the words that they used and how he narrated that was amazing. He was also very good in the written form as well. And how he wrote his communications. The letters he wrote were phenomenal. He was able to directly connect with the person on the other end of that communication better than almost any other president, I think, in history. And so when you think about communication, Abraham Lincoln certainly is a master of communication. There's also others, think about Martin Luther King and the I Have a Dream speech. Again, one of the most monumental speeches given in American history. Pivotal, changed the dynamics of the country in this modern era for sure. Martin Luther King was a leader because he was a great communicator. No doubt about it. He had a gift of communicating in any way he needed to communicate that was infectious. It was effective. It hit right in the heart, and it got people connected and started the unification of things and changing of things in our country that so desperately needed to be changed in that era. You also think about John F. Kennedy when he was the president, in the speech he gave talking about putting a man on the moon. Powerful, visionary, innovative, determined. And by God, we put a man on the moon. You think about Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, when we were engaged in the Cold War with Russia. You think about the Berlin Wall and the separation of East and West, and how he gave a monumental speech. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall. Ronald Reagan is one of the greatest communicators in this era, for sure, that were present in the United States. I also think of, and I was in the military at this time, and this was just really riveting for me to hear this speech, because I was in the military and 9/11 happened. George W. Bush, once the dust settled from that fateful day, George W. Bush goes on TV with strength and character and courage and communicates to the American public in the best possible way. I don't think anybody could have done it any better, with being resolute, being determined, focused. And I remember the speech he gave when he decided to go on the offense against terrorism, and we launched the war in Afghanistan, and we went after the terrorists that plotted the attacks against us on 9/11. Osama bin Laden, and we put people into the mountains, northern mountains of Afghanistan, and we initiated the war on terrorism, and we started preventing those things from happening on our own soil. We decided to go on offense and go after them. Those were very powerful speeches and communications. And Abraham Lincoln was certainly a master. He knew he had to communicate better than anybody else during his time as president, because the country was in turmoil. The fate and the future of our country was at stake. And he had to do it. He had the courage to do it. And thank God he was our president at that time. I think he might have been the only one that may be able to actually overcome the immense amount of obstacles we faced at that time. But let's contrast in where we are today. We're not in civil war in 2022, but we might not be that far from it. There's a lot of division in America today. There's a lot of division in the world today. There's a lot of hype and a lot of finger pointing and a lot of tension. Everything's polarized. Everything's exaggerated. Everything's extreme. We've had riots and just all kinds of, sad things happen and unfold. And we need leadership in our country today more than ever. The dynamics are a little bit different, but we need leadership in our politics. We need leadership in our companies. We need leadership in our neighborhoods and our churches. We need leadership everywhere. And so it's my passion. It's my intent, talking about Lincoln on leadership and sharing some of these golden takeaways from this masterful book, that we can apply these things and hopefully inspire people and motivate people and maybe shine a light on different things about leadership that we can move forward and make our country better. We all have the opportunity to shape the future. And so I want you, as we kind of wrap up today's episode, I want you to think about a few things. One, remember when President Lincoln took office, it was only 10 days before the Confederate States seceded the Union. The country was divided. We were in turmoil. Everything was chaos. 10 days before he was put in office, the brink of a civil war was erupting. And you think about, well, my goodness, we think about President Lincoln as the president, as the person that got us through a dark time in our nation's history, a tumultuous time in our nation's history. But if we really sit back and think about President Lincoln before he took office, what we don't remember is really who he was in the days prior to taking office. This is a country boy born and raised in Kentucky, the state for which I reside. I've, kind of driven by his birthplace, little dinky log cabin in the middle of nowhere. And then he later moved north and lived in Illinois for a good part of his life. But he was a small town country boy that ultimately ended up becoming a lawyer, just very much not a politician, not a leader, very quiet, kind of introverted, kind of docile, not what you normally think of in leadership, somebody strong, defiant, determined, in today's era. No, he was more calm and cool, never had an office, never was an elected official, never ran a major company, never really had a true leadership position. But this small town, rural Kentucky born man stepped up, connected with people, leveraged his values, his principles, his character, and the art and the gifts that God gave him, and his ability to connect with people and communicate with people. And a leader was born in the most difficult times. And so I challenge you, if Abraham Lincoln can come from nothing, a poor country boy, and go on to be what he became, one of the most admired leaders, presidents in American history, just think about you and where you came from. You can be a leader. The nation needs you. Your company needs you. Whatever you're doing in life, whether you're in a government role, a nonprofit role, a for-profit role, a big company, a small company, family-owned business, doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, the need for leadership is immense in today's world. People of character, people that care about people, that are compassionate, and that can get people unified, moving forward. And I think if you can go back, and I would encourage you to read this book, again, Lincoln on Leadership, Donald Phillips. Read this book. Ask yourself, man, if Abraham Lincoln can do it, maybe I can do it. I can make a difference. Because we sure do need leaders today. Trust me. I think if you understand these principles, it will change your perspective. It will change how you lead, how you engage the leaders above you, around you, below you. I would even encourage you to have your leaders around you read the book, maybe even talk about it together. I did that as a leader many years ago in a couple of organizations, and it was just phenomenal. The conversations we had of it kind of brought us closer together. And so I encourage you to maybe do the same. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts from President Abraham Lincoln himself. And I quote, "In the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years." The most reliable way to predict the future is to go create it. Be a leader. Be somebody people want to be like, be around. Be like Lincoln, and you will go far. Look forward to seeing you on the next show, where we're going to take these strategies we learned today, put them into a different frame, for us to think about and to operate and to help you as a leader get into a cadence of using these principles and implementing these principles where these become part of your just daily life and you can execute with excellence. So I look forward to next time. Hope you got a lot of value from this. This is powerful, powerful stuff. Look forward to talking with you next time.